erratic than usual, and why Yellowstone's Old Faithful eruption sparked concerns for the USGS. Yellowstone supervolcano and the famous geyser Old Faithful, that goes off like clockwork, significantly changed its activity after an earthquake 60 years ago. Scientists at United States Geological Survey had concerns over what would happen if a similar size event happens in the future. Yellowstone is under the states of Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, constantly monitored by USGS for what could be a super eruption. And while most seismic activity in the park is nowhere near the levels needed to trigger a super eruption, the earthquake that took place in 1959, August 17, in Hebgen Lake, which is just northwest of the Wyoming Park area, of 7.5 magnitude, caused a massive landslide and damage to highways, and even created what was called Earthquake Lake. USGS revealed on its website why this event is still studied today. The 2019 post reads that we often hear about the potential for large volcanic eruptions of Yellowstone volcano in the news, but we rarely focus on the threat of large earthquakes in the region, even though the hazard and risk from these types of events are much, much larger than a volcanic event, that is, an earthquake. It's important, as said, to discuss the effects of the earthquake on the region and what we might expect if a similar size event happens in the near future. Now, we know we had recent earthquakes nearby. The March 18 Salt Lake City quake out of nowhere of 5.7, and we still have earthquake swarms going on there today. And then a couple of weeks later after that, on the night of March 31st to April 1st, we had the 6.5 magnitude earthquake in craters of the Moon volcano field in Idaho, which was about 190 miles west of Yellowstone. And it shook Yellowstone. It also shook all the way up to Manitoba, Canada. Now, earthquakes caused up to, the Hebgen Lake earthquake caused up to 20 feet of offset on the surface that can still be seen today on both Hebgen Lake and Red Canyon faults, and to a lesser extent, the Madison Fault. And their website describes that within nearby Yellowstone National Park, many rock slides blocked the roadways, and there was damage to the world-famous Old Faithful Inn, where a large rock chimney collapsed. The USGS agency went on to detail how the event opened up scores of geysers as well. In other words, it changed the underground plumbing system. It said, maybe even more spectacular were the effects of the earthquake on the hydrothermal features in Yellowstone Park, and by the day after the earthquake, at least 289 springs in the geyser basins in the Firehole River had erupted as geysers, and of these, 160 were springs with no previous records of eruptions. During the first few days after the earthquake, most springs began to clear, but several years passed before clearing was generally complete. In addition, new hot ground soon developed in some places, and this became more apparent by the following spring with the formation of new fractures in sinter and linear zones of dead or dying trees. Some new fractures developed locally into fumaroles, and a few of these evolved into hot springs or geysers. And their statement said that it had detail on some particular features at Yellowstone that were affected. It said seismic geyser located in the upper geyser basin started out as a newly formed fracture after Hebgen Lake earthquake. The fracture slowly evolved into a fumarole, and in about 2.5 years after the Hebgen quake, it evolved into a small geyser. A few years later, it had changed into a very vigorous geyser that erupted to heights of 50 feet and excavated a vent with a maximum diameter of 40 feet and more than 20 feet deep. In 1971, major eruptions ceased at seismic geyser as activity shifted to a new small satellite crater that formed close by. It was called the Sapphire Pool. And their statement explained prior to Hebgen Lake earthquakes, Sapphire Pool, located in Biscuit Basin, erupted about every 17 to 20 minutes to a height of 3 to 6 feet after the Hebgen quake, and until September 5th, it surged to 6 to 8 feet height consistently. On September 5th, it steadily boiled and surged, became periodic, and the spring changed into a major geyser. Its eruptions were quite regular, occurring about every 2 hours, and were massive and spectacular. Some of the bursts were 150 feet and high and 200 feet across. From September 14th to 29, that's about a month and a half after the Hebgen quake, it reverted to a steadily surging cauldron, and on September 29, it again became a major geyser, and this activity persisted until 1968. Sapphire Pool today is still a crystal clear blue water pool, and it still violently boils and surges on occasion. Perhaps the most surprising event happened at Old Faithful, though, the geyser that gets its name due to the reliability to erupt at regular intervals. For the first few days after the Hebgen quake, Old Faithful was observed to be more erratic than usual, with successive longer and shorter intervals between eruptions, but that had been observed prior to the earthquake as well. The average eruption interval, the summer prior to the earthquake, was 61.8 minutes, the shortest seasonal average on record, but by September 1st, it had increased to 62.1 minutes. That's about 2 weeks after the earthquake. 255 eruption intervals timed during the last 10 days of December show an average of 67.4 minutes. Old Faithful's eruption interval has continued to increase since that time and is now averaging 93 minutes, which is a direct result of the Hebgen Lake earthquake. Is it? Well, that's a question. Is it because of Hebgen Lake that the timing of Old Faithful going off, the eruption has changed? This is on Express UK by Callum Hoare. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.